See that?
Yeah.
Now, do you see how the rocks have a gray film on them up there? And go down just below the arrow slot, and then it gets, that grayness goes away.
Yeah.
That's where the soil level is.
Oh.
My professor, Shimon Gibson, was a teenager, and he was on this dig, on the staff of this dig as a teenager, and he used to put his lunch in that arrow slot. Now, that's where the soil level is, and they dug all the way from Jaffa Gate all the way to where the wall corner's off over here. This entire area they excavated. Now, this is Herod the Great's palace. Do you think it's a good idea, as we were talking about at the model, to have a gate that leads to the outside of the city?
Yes.
Yes, a very good idea. This gate was discovered just a little bit after the model was made, which is why it's not in the model. Okay, so we're going to look at this gate, and we're going to walk in right here and go take advantage of that shade for the rest of the discussion. So we're coming in the gate, and then here's some of the original steps preserved. Then you have a wall that I want you to see right here. You can see that it's not very well preserved through here, but it connects over to this. Okay? And then there would have been a wall also connecting this in the tower. And then you see that the gate continues, and what's preserved in the bedrock here are the steps of the gate. You see that? And then also this little patch over here to the left of the Herodian wall. Okay, now let's look at Shimon's reconstruction of it. Because what was found here in archaeology, one of the problems with archaeology is that it itself is destructive. Okay, so what did they find here when they excavated? Stone pavement. And you see it here, where the gate came out, this was all stone pavement. Then you went up a flight of stairs, and then there was a stone pavement up there. Now, this is the way it was found in excavation, but when you find a floor in excavation, and you're trying to figure out when all this was built, guess what you do?
Tear it up.
You rip up the floor, in this case the stone pavement, you rip it up and look for coins underneath it to date it with. So all that's left in its original place of the stone pavement, I'll show you right now, is right here. This is a stone pavement. See all the archaeology that's under it? Do you see the little pieces of pottery and everything?
Yeah.
So you rip that up and you look for a coin. If you can find a coin, then it dates when this was made. Of course, this was made at the time of Herod the Great. So you got to, in your mind now, put your stone pavement that was, and then they dug all the way down to bedrock underneath the stone pavement. You got to put how it was found: stone pavement, where the gate leads out, stairs, stone pavement. Got it? It's really too bad that they didn't leave some of the stone pavement.
Yeah, come out a little bit more.
Okay. Now, unfortunately, I haven't covered this site yet in my book, so this isn't one of the 10 in the book, but it'll be probably the first one that I cover for volume 2. So I'm going to read a few historical sources. The first one is Philo. So Philo is contemporary with Herod the Great and with Pontius Pilate. Well, with Pontius Pilate and Herod the Great. Okay, so he's living in the end of the 1st century BC, beginning of the 1st century AD. So listen to what he writes. It says, Pilate was one of the emperor's lieutenants, having been appointed governor of Judea. He dedicated some gilt shields in the palace of Herod in the holy city. Now, the reason that this is important is this is an extra biblical site, or extra biblical source, that's telling us, that's associating Pontius Pilate in Jerusalem at Herod the Great's palace. You're Pontius Pilate. Where are you going to hang out? In some little Hasmonean palace somewhere in town, or in the palace?
The palace.
Whenever Josephus is talking about another palace, he explains, he gives more detail on the one that he's talking about, the Hasmonean palace. The palace where Archelaus is. But when he's talking about the palace, he's always talking about this. Okay? Now, there is only one gate that leads out of the palace. Now, again, I remind you too, if we're Jews in the first century and I say to you, we're going to go over to the temple, I'm going to go over to the temple. Does that mean I'm going into the Holy of Holies of the temple or the holy place of the temple?
No.
It means what? I'm going over to the temple complex, right?
Yeah, right.
Same thing with the palace. If you go to the palace or you go into this gate, then you're in the palace. It doesn't mean that you're in Herod the Great's bedroom, right? It just means that you're in this palace complex called
Right.
the palace.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So here's Josephus. Josephus says, adjoining these towers, the towers we were just looking at, was the king's palace, which surpasses all description. A wall 30 cubits high completely enclosed it, so it was fortified off from the rest of the city. Inside were immense banquet halls and bedrooms furnished in gold and silver for 100 guests. Here's what's inside there: groves, promenades, colonnades, canals, ponds, statuary. That only makes sense, right? This
Yeah.
is the Roman stronghold for the
Right.
city.
Right.
It's going to have a bunch of statues of the gods and the goddesses.
Uh-huh.
And it says that it's surrounded with this statuary. Okay, so if you're a Jew, if you go through that door, are you clean or unclean?
Unclean.
Yes, through that gate. Now here's another one that I think is key to this. Again, remember when we were looking at the model, we saw that there was a gate that linked the palace to the rest of the city. Most probably, almost certainly there was, right, a connection to the city. But there's only one gate that connects the palace to the outside of the city. And this is known from archaeology, because this is the wall line that leads to the outside of to the open country, and the whole thing was dug and only one gate was found. Interestingly, this Israeli dig knew what they were going to find before they found it. You know how they knew? Gospel of John.
Uh-huh.
They knew they would find at least one gate out here with the stone pavement. Okay? And this is where they found it. Now, to me, this is the key verse that tells us that this is where the trial of Jesus took place. And it's Luke 23, verse 26. It says, as the soldiers led him away. And what they're talking about is the place of the trial. So it's as they're beginning to lead him away from the place of the trial, they seized Simon from Cyrene, who was on his way in from the country, and put the cross on him and made him carry it behind Jesus. There's only one place that there could be a trial, and that's what these stone pavement gates were used for, were trials. There's only one place that Simon could have been coming in from the open country when he's taken when Jesus is being led away from the place of trial to the place of crucifixion. Okay? To me, that verse nails it. It nails this as the place. Okay, so you got to put your stone pavement in your mind, covering this, the gate itself. You're going to talk to Jews. Are you going to talk to Jews inside there? No, you're going to talk to them out here. Okay, then there were ancient stairs. Come on up here. More stone pavement.
see through here. See these rocks.
See two over here. Okay, now, okay, Rach. Now, stone pavement. Now I want you to go back to in your minds to Dan. This is why I made such a big deal of the Bema at Dan. Because here is the same thing. A Bema, because it's in the Gospels, it's from the Greek, Bema. The one that you were looking at Dan is a Bama from the Hebrew. Okay? Judgment seat. So you can talk to the people outside, go in and out. Now, do you remember the judgment seat in the gate of Dan?
Yeah.
Remember those rocks that were there for the shade?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, there's one right over there preserved, which was found actually over here where the judgment seat is, but they put it over there just to kind of protect it a little bit more. Okay, so you can go into the palace and back out and address a crowd, and then you can pass judgment from the judgment seat. So now all we have to do is read the account.
Yes, exactly. Gonna get the shade.
Stand here.
Okay, so we're going to go to John. John. So I'll start in chapter 18. And we'll read quite a bit of this because we want to get this. And I want you to visualize this as I'm reading. So, then the Jewish leaders took Jesus from Caiaphas to the palace of the Roman governor. Okay? And again, we had that extra biblical source saying, putting Pontius Pilate in the palace that Herod the Great had built. If you have an ESV study Bible or a New American Standard study Bible, or if you have an NIV archaeology Bible or an ESV archaeology Bible, and you look up where Jesus was tried, they will say here at the palace that Herod the Great built. The problem is they won't tell you specifically where he was tried. They won't tell you about this place. You know why? Because it's never been published.
Oh.
This excavation took place way back in the early 70s, and all this material was gathered, and the guy who was in charge of the excavation never published it, and so now it's been passed to my professor, the baton, to publish. And I'm telling you, we've been going for years through this material that comes from this dig. I don't see it happening. I just don't see it happening in 50 years.
Oh, wow.
I mean, because there's so much material. So that's why your, say, ESV study Bible doesn't say here, because it's got nothing to source for what it's saying. See the problem?
Yeah.
However, scholars know this place. And so if it was published, then they would source it. Okay. Chapter 18, verse 28, then Jewish leaders took Jesus from Caiaphas to the palace of the Roman governor. By now it was early morning, and to avoid ceremonial uncleanness, they did not enter the palace, because they wanted to be able to eat the Passover. So Pilate came out to them and asked, "What charges are you bringing against this man?" So they're all out there. You understand why they can't go in there. Mm-hmm. So he comes out and asks, what are the charges? I'm skipping down to verse 33. Pilate then went back inside the palace, summoned Jesus, and asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" "Is that your own idea?" Jesus asked, "or did others talk to you about me?" "Am I a Jew?" Pilate replied. "Your own people and chief priests handed you over to me. What is it you have done?" Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jewish leaders. but now my kingdom is from another place. Which, by the way, that's why there's so much archaeology for Herod the Great. His kingdom was of this world, and so little for Jesus. We don't even have a record in the Bible that he built a chair, right? But he built something magnificent of which we are all part, but his kingdom is not of this world.
Amen.
You are the king then. You are a king then, said Pilate. Jesus answered, you say that I am a king. You say that I am a king. In fact, the reason I was born and came into the world is to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me. What is truth? Retorted Pilate. With this he went out again to the Jews gathered there and said, I find no basis for a charge against him. Let's skip over to chapter 19, verse 1. Then Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged. The soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head. They clothed him in a purple robe and went up to him again and again, saying, Hail, King of the Jews. And they slapped him in the face. Once more, Pilate came out and said to the Jews gathered there, Look, I am bringing him out to you to let you know that I find no basis for a charge against him. When Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns, imagine Jesus coming out wearing a crown of thorns and the purple robe. Pilate said to them, Here is your man. As soon as the chief priests and their officials saw him, they shouted, Crucify! Crucify! Can you understand why this is one of the most sensitive places in Israel? Shimon was allowed to put the drawings on these signs, but he was not allowed to say what happened here.
Oh, man.
Pilate answered, You take him and crucify him. As for me, I find no basis for a charge against him. The Jewish leaders insisted, We have a law, and according to that law, he must die, because he claimed to be the Son of God. Which, of course, is blasphemy, unless it is true. When Pilate heard this, he was even more afraid, and he went back inside the palace. Where do you come from? He asked Jesus. But Jesus gave him no answer. Do you refuse to speak to me? Pilate said. Don't you realize I have power either to free you or to crucify you? Jesus answered, You would have no power over me if it were not given to you from above. Therefore, the one who handed me over to you is guilty of a greater sin. From then on, Pilate tried to set Jesus free, but the Jewish leaders kept shouting, If you let this man go, you are no friend of Caesar. Anyone who claims to be a king opposes Caesar. And we've been talking a lot about Augustus, right? Caesar. The Caesar that is now the emperor of Rome is Tiberius at the time of this event. Okay. Remember the Pontius Pilate stone that we saw in the Israel Museum, and we saw it down there depicted in Caesarea? That comes from a temple that is built to worship Tiberius as the divine king. And here we have Jesus claiming to be a divine king. And so the Jews are saying, yeah, we got him right there on that charge. When Pilate heard this, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judge's seat at a place known as the stone pavement, which in Aramaic is Gabbatha. It was the day of preparation of the Passover. It was about noon. Here is your king, Pilate said to the Jews. But they shouted, take him away, crucify him. Shall I crucify your king? Pilate asked. Listen to this. We have no king but Caesar. The chief priests answered.
Oh, man.
Do you see how blasphemous that is?
Yes, yes.
The Caesar of Rome, Tiberius, he's not the offspring of Abraham. of Isaac, of Jacob. He's not the offspring of Judah who received the blessing that the kingship would come through him and not depart until it came to the one to which it belonged. Tiberius isn't the son of David from the family and house of David.
Yeah, right.
But the one standing here with a crown of thorns around his head and a purple robe being mocked is all of that and more.
Yeah.
Finally, Pilate handed him over to them to be crucified. So how exactly did they go from here? And then, of course, as they were leaving, then in comes Simon from Cyrene, from the open country, and the cross is placed on him. How did they go from here to the place of crucifixion, which we were at earlier? Well, he was handed over to be crucified outside the city wall, and he was crucified outside the city wall. So probably he went in a progression outside the city wall with the crowd following him. Some believe, and it could be true, that they went around and into the city so that they could have the procession go through the city and get more of a crowd. We don't really know, but we know how far it is from where he was turned over to be crucified and where he was crucified. So the soldiers took charge of Jesus, carrying his own cross. He went out to the place of the skull, which in Aramaic is called Golgotha. There they crucified him, and with him 2 others, one on each side, and Jesus in the middle. So you can get some pictures of this.